Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the Social Outcome Conference, and welcome to this roundtable where we've got a beautiful lineup of experienced practitioners and some of our own researchers at the Government Outcomes Lab to discuss evidence and practical insights from the UK's Life Chances Fund. You might have noticed we've got a busy panel up front. It's because we really wanted to be as inclusive as possible this morning. As many of you will know, the Government Outcomes Lab is the evaluation partner for the Life Chances Fund. But as Nigel was explaining yesterday, if we could go to the next slide, beyond the research work that we do here at the GoLab, we actually very, very proactively seek to build bridges between the practitioners, policymakers in this space, and really try really hard to connect them with the research work that we do, and indeed with the research work that other academics and scholars in the field do. So it's my absolute pleasure to join everyone here today. We've got a wonderful mix of representatives from many Life Chances Fund projects. Some are here with us in the room, some are joining us from Zoom. We're sorry you weren't able to join us in Oxford. But I know we also have other participants here, so I know there's real interest from outside the UK and outside the Life Chances Fund project to learn from the experience of these wonderful projects. I think many look up to the UK for all the innovative work that it's been leading in this space. So this hopefully will be an opportunity for the Life Chances Fund projects themselves to connect with each other a bit more, learn from each other, celebrate their successes. But hopefully it's an opportunity for everyone here to learn from the excellent practice that they've been doing. We're researchers, we don't shy away from some of the more difficult questions, so we're also going to be sharing some of the research work that we've been doing, but we really want to spend most of the time hearing from the projects themselves. And in the spirit of bridging practice and research, this session will be jointly chaired by myself. I'm Head of Partnerships and Engagement at the GoLab, and my colleague Elle, who's our Research Director. So I'll hand over to you, Elle.
Great, thank you. Because of James's inability to present directly to you this morning, I'm actually going to be passing directly to Roger. Roger works with the National Lottery Community Fund, who really are the kind of guiding organisation working very closely with the Life Chances Fund project. So over to you, Roger, for some insights in terms of your take on the Life Chances Fund and the work that you've been doing.
Hi, thanks, Al. Morning, everybody. We administer the fund on behalf of DCMS, and as anyone who was in the kind of the session yesterday with David Knott, our chief exec, as he explained, we primarily deliver grant funding and funding using money raised through the National Lottery, and we administer some programs on behalf of others, particularly where they align with our own ambitions within the fund. And in the cases of the Life Chances Fund, that's on multiple levels. There's obviously the impact for beneficiaries, for the service users that are being supported through these projects, in terms of some really tough, some quite challenging social policy issues, and they align very strongly with the sorts of work that we do on some of our other grant funding program, where we're quite deliberate and targeted in our approaches to tackling those issues, particularly around prevention, around looking at systemic change, where organisations want to work and collaborate and work in partnership or in a different way to achieve that impact and those differences for the people, the communities that they're supporting. Life Chances Fund was also a natural progression for us, where we were interested at the time of the launch of the Life Chances Fund in exploring the role that social impact can play in enabling those sorts of projects to tackle those issues, and also in the delivery of social impact bonds as a tool and a mechanism to enable some of that to take place. So it was a natural progression. We'd used lottery funding to do some of that activity through commissioning outcomes, better outcomes, and Life Chances Fund kind of continues that journey. It has within it a whole range of cross-sector type interventions, which, as I said, align really strongly with what we see within our partnership work in the grant funding sense, and also within some of our social impact work as well. Really interested in today just to see that opportunity to celebrate and come together, because when we're talking about triggers and when we're talking about outcomes, we're very often, I suppose, not there at the forefront, considering the beneficiaries and the impact it's actually making. And these projects enable all sorts of really interesting activity to take place. It's a really diverse portfolio. Some of the activity that is being funded in there, because the programme covers a whole range of different themes, the scale, the size, the ambition, the number of stakeholders that some of these projects are working with varies really considerably. But your shared ambitions, your shared experiences, particularly in the design and delivery of a SIB, I think is really interesting to explore today, and the opportunity to come together to share some of that. And finally, I suppose a reflection on sustainability, that sustainability means different things, I think, to different people. Within our grant funding space, we have exactly the same conversations. What happens at the edge and at the end of a time-limited program? Projects want to talk and consider what happens next, particularly around how they move their service users on. But it's very difficult to think about what success looks like and what the next step is. And I think sustainability probably goes back here to why the SIB in the first place. Was it to enable that system change? Was it to enable testing and learning, piloting, doing some kind of proof of concept? Was it coming together to collaborate? Was it around the data and the performance management? So I think considering why the SIB and what the role of that SIB was at the beginning would help us consider what we want to do around sustainability.
Thank you so much, Roger. I just wanted to say a few words. These are the headline figures from the Life Chances Fund. We have 29 very different projects that are currently in delivery, and the commitment to pay for outcomes from the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport is more than matched by a commitment from local commissioners across the country. So there's £114 million that's been committed by other commissioners to support locally designed projects. And these are projects that really intend to respond to some of the deepest and most challenging social issues. If the projects achieve what they intend to, over 50,000 people who are expected to have improved well-being or improved situations in their lives. So the projects are all working in very different ways, but I think the commitment and the passion to improve social outcomes really binds all of these projects together. On the next slide, I just wanted to signal that a lot of the information about the projects themselves is available online through the Indigo Impact Bond dataset. So you can see this gives you an overview of the projects. Most of them are still in implementation. One of them is no longer in delivery, and you can get a flavour of the policy sectors and the policy issues that these projects are responding to. So a number of the projects are working in the space of child and family welfare. We also have a number of projects working on employment and training, on health, on homelessness. What this donut plot does not capture is the degree of cross-cutting work that is happening. So a number of these projects are not easily classified as responding to a single policy issue, and are actually trying to work in more creative ways to cut across what we often call the silos of government. So do speak to projects directly to understand how they're framing and understanding the issues on the ground and how they're responding. The QR code will take you directly to the Indigo Impact Bond page. So each of the Life Chances Fund projects is working in quite a pioneering way to bring an outcomes focus to cross-sector partnerships. We know that this is not always an easy way to work, and that setting up services that buck against the status quo can be quite challenging. So please know that you are in a room of pioneers here. Taking an outcomes focus can bring great potential in terms of working differently to improve services and bring about positive change. And because this sort of pioneering, slightly different way of working, we have a very real emphasis on learning across the Life Chances Fund. So I just want to say a few words about this learning and evaluation agenda, where GoLab is a key partner for the Life Chances Fund. So as I mentioned, each of the Life Chances Fund projects feature in the Indigo Impact Bond datasets. Please see this as a living project description. We are trying to improve all the time how these projects are described, and it's really important to us that this feels like an authentic representation of what is going on. So please do work with Juliana and Ozioma and others to improve the way in which your project is portrayed through this data set. You'll see these online project descriptions a little bit thin on some of the detail around outcomes and outcomes achievements. And over the autumn, we're particularly keen to work with projects to build out the descriptions of project achievements. I wanted to highlight that there are already a number of project case studies. I think we have a slide on this, thank you, that are already available online. So particular thanks to those who have helped develop these. So we have a case study on chances, on future impacts, on the Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnership, and on the Mental Health and Employment Partnership. So thank you. If you would like to work up a more detailed case study, please get in touch with a member of the GoLab team, and Fernando in particular is conducting a lot of analysis of the Life Chances Fund projects. So a quick summary of the evaluation approach that we're taking. There are 3 layers. At the outermost level, there's a fund level programme evaluation that's been led by ICF research consultants, and that's trying to evaluate the fund. This is an outcomes fund that has particular characteristics in terms of a central government commitment to supporting local outcomes commissioning. And there's an evaluation of how that is operating and trying to draw lessons learned from the fund administration. Then we have what we call the SIV mechanism evaluation. This is the part that's facilitated by the GoLab team. And here we're really aiming to evaluate and learn from impact bonds as a commissioning tool. How are they different to more conventional ways of funding services? What makes this approach distinctive? And what are the outcomes that might be associated with this different way of working? And then we have the Life Chances Fund project-led evaluations. So this is guided by the LCF teams themselves. It might be evaluating specific aspects of the intervention or the local ecosystem, particular elements of local delivery. And I should say that members of the GoLab team are really happy to help for those projects that are still working on their evaluations, still scoping, and please do feel able to get in touch if you'd like some support to think through what your questions might be and how you might go about answering those. I just don't feel like I could talk about impact bond evaluation without talking about donuts. I always describe the need to try, what we're trying to understand here is not the usual focus of evaluations, what I think of as the jammy frontline service in the jammy donut. What we're interested in is the doughy scaffolding, the partnerships, the funding arrangements, the accountability that holds that service, wraps around it, and hopefully enables better quality service and improvement in people's lives. I also just wanted to take a moment to thank everyone who's helped shape and who has been involved in the Life Chances Fund research. I can't name you because of research ethics, but you know who you are. So I wanted to say a big thank you, whether that's responding to a survey, by participating in a workshop or an interview. Thank you so much, because I think it really is driving on our collective understanding of what this approach might mean, and particularly the variation, because no 2 impact bonds are alike.
That's a wonderful summary of the Life Chances Fund and the evaluation work. And it's now time to hear from the projects themselves. So we've actually invited all the Life Chances Fund projects to join us today. Obviously, we can't feature them all on the panel. So can I just invite everyone in the room, everyone on Zoom, if you are involved in any way in a Life Chances Fund project, please say hi in the chats. I know that many of you, even here in the room, are connected to Zoom. We'd love to know who we have in the room from the Life Chances Fund projects. Introduce yourselves to others and do share a bit more about the work you've been doing. We won't have much time to go into the detail of all the projects, but just to echo what Elle was saying, please head to our website. We've really built over the last few years a wealth of information on all the projects, and we're always keen to add more information and more data. So just just do get in touch with us. But without further ado, let's move into the next part of our discussion. You've all already heard that these projects are all very different and very innovative. So we've tried to group some of the insights coming out of the practice so far around 3 clusters. And we've chosen these 3 because we think they're very important to understanding or getting a deeper understanding, I suppose, of how these projects work, but kind of how they can help improve the provision of public services at a wider level, which we know it's an ambition that many of the projects have. So we've invited a number of projects. We've been very mean about the amount of time we've given them. Apologies for that. So we've been very strict with everyone and told them they have 5 minutes to give us just a flavor of the project and then specific reflections on one of the 3 clusters that you see on the screens in front of you. So we're first going to be discussing how impact bonds or social outcome contracts help unlock collaboration at local level and how they can empower civil society. And for that, we've got 3 projects. So Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnerships, and we've got Mila here in the room next to me joining us. Welcome, Mila. I'll pass on the microphone in a second. We've got Sarah Cook online. Sarah, welcome. I can see you're there. Lovely to have you. We've also got Robbie Smith, who works on the Pulse project. Welcome, Robbie. And then Esther from Future Impact is also joining us online. A warm welcome, Esther. Elle, can I hand over to you first, maybe just for 2 words as to why we care so much about how, when, if impact bonds unlock further collaboration?
Thank you. Just one word, well, 1 minute on collaboration, because it's so tantalizing, but I think we can be talking about a few different things. And there's lots of collaboration within the Life Chances Fund. We can think about collaboration in terms of co-commissioning. This is particularly novel in the Life Chances Fund, where we have multiple outcome funders. So at a minimum, in every Life Chances Fund project, there is a commitment to pay for outcomes from central government and from a local government commissioner. And in some cases, more than one local government commissioner. So we have projects that work across different local authorities to pay for outcomes and collaborate in their commissioning work. We have some that span different local commissioners from different commissioning teams within a particular area. We also see collaboration across different delivery organisations, often different charities, VCSEs, coming together and collaborating, working in different ways in these projects. And of course, collaboration across those organisations directly involved in the outcomes-based project. So with that in mind, we'd love to hear about the Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnership. Thanks, Mila.
Thank you so much. Oh, perfect. And I will, well, to bring it to life, I think we should pass it on to Sarah first, because I think we're all eager to hear what this looks like in practice and what are we trying to achieve. So Sarah, if you don't mind taking us on the K-pop journey, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, no problem. Morning, everyone. Nice to virtually see you all. Kirklees Better Outcomes Partnership is an alliance of 8 specialist organisations. We're all collaborating to empower and enable our individuals at risk of homelessness to achieve their potential and to have independent and fulfilling lives. Our aim is to work with 6,000 people over 5 years, so we are one of the largest programmes across the beautiful and rural urban locations of Kirklees. We focus on settling and stabilising our participants' accommodation so they've got a safe and stable home whilst working with them to understand their goals and ambitions and doing whatever we can to enable that. Operating as a floating support service whilst working with individuals in their homes and communities, we've moved away from deficit-based and traditional styles of support, where services work in a really linear process, only dealing with one issue at a time. And we've reallocated power back to the individuals so they determine their priority and what enables them to lead their support, and we follow that. If employment is a priority for someone in prison, we work with them to prepare them to re-enter the workplace at the same time as focusing on finding a new home, to ensure that they don't move into supported accommodation as per traditional pathways, and instead finding private rented properties where rent is affordable and they can return to the workplace. So this power reallocation is clear from the onset. We've removed our lengthy assessment forms, risk assessments, anything excessive that focuses on what's wrong with a person, and replaced it with a conversation. Our key question is, what do you want to do and how can we get you there? As Professor Batlina eloquently highlighted yesterday, the impact of removing power and decision-making from the top and giving it back to individuals and communities has meant those on KBOP who had previously repeatedly worked with multiple services multiple times, having only their presenting issue addressed rather than considering the cause of their homelessness or trauma, and now leading their own support decisions. We work with them to rebuild their self-belief, confidence, and help them move forward to independence. Our ability to be flexible means when we identify a systemic issue holding someone back, we can adapt our approach as necessary to problem solve and collaborate with partner agencies. We act as the ecosystem orchestrators to bring people together, health, housing, justice, all for the benefit of the individual that we're accountable to. Our co-production panel leads our service redesign, and we've introduced multiple pilots such as specialist BAME workers, tenancy rescue teams, prison leavers, and a pathway collaborating across multiple services for that end goal for the person. So far, this approach has enabled 2,035 individuals to sustain and access a home and 870 people to enter education, training, and employment. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And yes, as you can hear, this is really a different way of thinking about delivery of human services. And it applies to everything that Sarah talks about, but it also applies to the work that focuses on helping families stay together, helping support vulnerable women, helping support unpaid carers. And you will hear about all of that today from Robbie, from Bethany, from Vicky, from Emma, Sarah, and others. And it really feels that this is what we think is really powerful is that, and what we're seeing and what you heard from Sarah is that this delivery creates a way of genuinely enabling personalized services. And the issues that we're talking about are not able to be fixed by one size fits all solution. We're not trying to find a vaccine that can be applied to everybody. What we're trying to create is a personalized journey for every single individual, because each situation, each person is completely different. And that's really the power of this way of working and of this collaboration, and why being able to recognize that and then being able to think both about the dough and the jam that enables that is what's really exciting. I think what is really important to recognize is, as Elle alluded at the beginning, again, for this delivery to work in a way that Sarah described, one needs to think about a person and a community as the issue or as the focus area, not about a budget line. And we cannot be looking at people through budget lines or looking at people through specific policy area definitions. We need to be looking at people as individuals and as communities and places as the places that they are, and then really figuring out what is it that we can do to make a change. And why, in our view, the Life Chances Fund has been really powerful is because for that collaboration to be possible, one needs to have the dough, the infrastructure that enables that partnership building. And a fund like Life Chances Fund enables that co-commissioning and is one important part in the infrastructure that helps that alignment, and it helps bring different parts of the system together and different stakeholders together that can enable that holistic approach. Some of the things that worry us in terms of the things that we do need to work on is how do you continue creating that personalized journey in budgets which are fixed per year. So if we talk about outcome funders as government primarily, we know that we're dealing with the funding structure which is fixed in each year. And so how do you create that completely individualized journey that we know makes a difference if you need to create a funding profile that is much more akin to kind of rolling out a solution that fits for everybody. So those are the things that we would love to hear everybody's thoughts on and find solutions around so that more programs like KBOP can be launched.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Mila. I should say it would be great if you could keep the conversation going using the Zoom chat. So please do feel able to pose questions there. Robbie, though, I saw you nodding strongly there. We would love to hear your reflections from the Pause project.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name's Robbie Smythe. I'm Impact Operations Director at Bridges, and I support our sort of 4 partnerships working with Pause. So we've been delivering this work since February 2019. We started off with a small practice down in Plymouth, a citywide practice. And then subsequently, we mobilised a county-wide practice in Derbyshire and then scaled that to Worcestershire and Northamptonshire to create the Midlands Pause Hub. We work with obviously 4 different authorities, local authorities. We have 2 delivery partners, and we have our expert partner, PAWS, hence the name of the model. It's a license model, evidence model. They're a social franchisee, and we work very closely with them to deliver this intensive model of support across those areas. So the PAWS model is focused on working with women who are experiencing multiple removals of children. So who is that? Well, many of the women that we work with are completely hidden from the system. In fact, the system doesn't support the women or follow the women. The way that we have to locate the women across the localities is actually through the children's services records, by tracking back through the removals who those women are. So the system is completely not focused on a woman going through multiple trauma. Many of these women have experienced multiple trauma since childhood, are experiencing abusive relationships, are trapped in a cycle of drug and alcohol, mental health, repeat trauma. And these are the women that many other services in the localities will say are too difficult to engage and can't engage and don't engage within the service. So in terms of setting up these partnerships and by identifying PAWS as our expert partner, really what we felt our best approach here was to try and create the best possible platform for this evidence-based model. And so that was our approach. We focused on the environment around the team. We continue to focus on the environment around the team. So we have additional governance in and around this process called our project board, and that is an opportunity for us monthly to get an engaged group of cross-sector stakeholders to collaboratively problem solve with the practice lead issues that are affecting the team in the practice. That has given us greater insight and ability to be able to respond to the flexibility that we've been able to bring in through the outcome approach. It means that we've brought in additional support roles, additional clinical support. We've brought in specialist high-level training for the teams, and all of that has been focused on creating an effective platform for the team to succeed. Additionally, the increased accountability from all stakeholders in the partnership, so the local authority, the children's services, the local health, as well as non-statutory services, really enables us to identify blockages and barriers to the service and overcome those by developing pathways very, very quickly. So we have a very agile service, and the impact of this is that all 4 of our practices currently are exceeding our expectations. We have really low staff turnover with a well-trained and supported frontline teams. We've got stronger data and swifter decision-making. And we looked at the numbers earlier, and it's that 51,000 people will be helped. And the numbers that we're helping through the PAWS program are very little, but the journey is huge. So currently, we're really proud to have supported over 180 women on this life-changing journey. And we're really proud that we've managed to succeed with a 94% completion rate to date. And what does that mean, a completion? Well, that means that a woman has broken the cycle of trauma. And really there are multiple outcomes for every woman: escaping abusive relationships, accessing assisting support successfully, accessing healthcare for the first time in years, housing, benefits, drug and alcohol, improved contact with children, huge improvements in self-worth and well-being. And of course, all of those outcomes reduce demand across a range of public sector services. But really, the focus of this model and the success of this model is just breaking that cycle of trauma and supporting the women to re-engage with the world and to develop long-term aspirations. And by looking after our teams really well and making sure that they have all the mechanisms and all the mechanisms in place and barriers removed, then the efficacy of this work is increased. So yeah, that's an overview of our work with PAWS.
Robbie, thank you so much for sharing your reflections on such a person-centered approach. That's really powerful. Thank you. Esther, I wonder, could I bring you in to reflect on your project, future impacts, and your experience of collaboration in the Life Chances Fund?
Yes. Hello, everybody. So yes, I'm contract manager at Futures, where I manage the Nottingham City element of the Future Impact programme. So yeah, I've come here today just to tell you a bit more about our programme and how it has helped unlock better collaboration between ourselves, Nottingham City, Nottinghamshire Local Authority, for those that don't know, 2 very interlinked neighbouring local authorities in the East Midlands area, and how we've also achieved better outcomes for the young people that we're working with. So the aim of the Future Impact project, for those that don't know, is to support young people with special education needs and disabilities between the ages of 15 to 24 to move into and to sustain EAT. We think a really important aspect of the programme is that sustainment of EAT. There's often lots of projects around that help young people get into EAT, but then they don't help them sustain it and carry on being successful. So to us, that's a really important element of the programme. On the Future Impact programme, there's also a huge focus on our coaches giving ongoing person-centred, individualised support to young people so they can develop their soft skills, their life skills, and this then helps them overcome the many barriers that this group of young people often face, so they can then be successful in all elements of their life, in learning, work, and just general kind of living, independent living. The idea for the Future Impact project came about when Futures Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire kind of recognised that young people with SEND were overrepresented in our NEET figures. So in 2017, only 2% of young people in both areas were actually in employment with SEND, compared to 6% of the national average, which is obviously still very low, but in Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire it was really, really low. So this was obviously something we were really concerned about, that there was a lot of young people that weren't successfully transitioning into education, training or employment, and if they were, they weren't kind of sustaining it. So this became a real kind of strategic priority for both local authorities and for us as well, who delivered a lot of their kind of NEET work. So we came together with both local authorities to look for ways to improve young people with SEND moving into EAT, and came up with the idea of the Future Impact programme. So now it's been running for 4 years and we've had some amazing results. We're incredibly proud across both areas of the difference that we've been able to make for the young people that we've worked with. So far we've supported 660 young people. The target was originally 500 over 5 years, so we've kind of achieved the target group of people that we need to work with it a year early, and I think that just shows the kind of the huge demand for the programme. Of the 660 young people that we've worked with, we've supported 68% of those young people to move into education or training on a wide range of different levels of courses, so from entry level to university. 74% of the young people that we've supported into education have gained qualifications. 58% of the young people that we've worked with have gained employment, so that's part-time and full-time. And as I said earlier, when we looked before, it was 2% of young people with SEND in our area were employment. So that's like just, we're so proud of the difference we've been able to make to so many young people. 16% have started volunteering. So volunteering can be a really important opportunity for the young people that we work with. It's something that can kind of, it helps develop their confidence, their employability skills, and helps them often with the next step onto education or training. And when we did some analysis, 72% of the young people that had done volunteering then went on into education. So kind of quite an important element of the contract. Our impact measures also show, as well as kind of success in those hard outcomes, we've also had lots of kind of success with young people in terms of developing their soft skills and their life skills. So our impact measures that show that we've been able to make a big difference in how confident young people feel, helping them with time management, application and interview readiness, and life skills and independence, to name but a few. So just moving on to say how collaboration has helped us. So we have an amazing relationship with both local authorities. Right from the beginning, we establish a steering group, and that comes together every quarter. So that's where commissioners from Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire and representatives from LCF, Big Lottery come, myself and other future managers are there. And these have been really important platforms to us, for us to kind of learn from each other, to share successes, explore current challenges, and all the time look at what we can do better in our areas to get better outcomes for our young people. So that's been like hugely successful in bringing us all together and continuing that kind of collaboration. When I ask commissioners about what they think has been the key kind of success of the collaboration, they've said to me that it's about, there isn't a postcode lottery anymore in our areas about who gets support and who doesn't, that there's the collaboration has enabled clear pathways of progression for all young people with SEND in both areas. And we have seen an overall reduction in NEET figures in both areas. I would say on an operational level as well, it's really helped. So we often do have contracts funded from City and Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire, but often these contracts work in silos from each other. So what's been the beauty of this is having City, LCF staff, Future Impact staff and counties, which brought us all together a lot more. So we, we've had away days together, we're regularly sharing information, we've had training together. So we're constantly sharing good practice, learning from each other. So I think it's been really useful for the operational staff to have that wider pool of knowledge and experience to kind of learn and share. The relationship has also benefited the area in other ways. So, following the success of the joint partnership working on this, there's also more joint funding in other areas. So Nottingham City and Nottinghamshire have come together to jointly fund our local SENDIAS service. For those that don't know, that's an information and support service for parents of young people with SEND. So we're currently working with them as their key partner to further fund and develop that service. So again, that helps us improve outcomes for young people and families in the two areas. Going forward, both local authorities are still fully committed to the agenda of supporting young people with SEND when the LCF comes to an end next year. So we're all working together to explore all future kind of funding areas to hopefully the project can continue.
Esther, thank you very much. Let me stop you there. We're going to come on to some of the sustainability and life beyond Life Chances Fund questions in the third part of our discussion. Huge thanks to all our speakers so far, and thank you for being so good with sticking to time. That's wonderful. I'm just going to pause really quickly for a question or two. I actually see a question in the chat from Russ Wood. Roger, I feel like you're probably the best person to take that, and maybe just a brief one. And Ross, there's loads more information on how the fund works in practice online, so perhaps one of my colleagues can share that. But really quickly, Roger, so Russ is asking online, could you describe a little the process for the project being facilitated? So how does the fund operate?
Right. Yeah. It's been a lengthy journey, and I'm sure all of those on screen in the room would agree that it has been. That there was a multiple stage to it, really. So this was an open application process in terms of how the process was initially started, and they are locally commissioned SIBs, so the partnerships were coming together to form to create an application, if you like, to the fund, to Life Chances Fund. There was an independent support contract put in place, funded through Life Chances Fund, which enabled the projects to get access to what I think was valuable independent support, because it provided an opportunity to speak to people who weren't from the National Lottery Fund or from DCMS. But I think it's fair to say there's a lot of learning come from that phase, because I think that question that's looking at how were those projects facilitated in that coming together phase. That coming together phase is really a phase of engagement. It's what was the driving force for why what was attractive around the SIB and what was attractive about Life Chances Fund. but actually then finding the commissioners, bringing those commissioners on board, and then engagement with those commissioners for the commissioners within their own governance structures to find the funding, to then find the delivery partners and the contracting, all the different elements to that. As Ellie said earlier, it's not an easy process. We recognise that, and there's a lot of learning from the programme, I think, in terms of how that delivery phase was facilitated and set up initially.
Thanks for that, Roger. I'm going to move us on just because we still have lots of interesting projects to hear from. But I think it's really clear already from the first 3 projects we've heard from, very different challenges, very different organizations involved. I think one thing they all 3 shared, though, it's how the collaboration enable more person-centered services and support. So that's really interesting. But continuing the discussion, I'm delighted to invite the next group of speakers. We've made an exception for Neil Stanworth. He doesn't actually work on any of the Life Chances Fund projects, as far as I know.
I did work on an awful lot of them.
This question of the value added of outcome-focused partnerships, I feel like I don't need to really introduce it, because I think everyone in the room, everyone online knows what we're talking about. It's Els, Jamie, Donut. I think it's the question that a lot of government officials or commissioners would be asking themselves when they're looking at the option to fund the service through an impact one as opposed to something else. And again, we will talk about the value added that encompasses so many different things. And with the projects that we've invited for this part of the discussion, and with Neil, we'll be exploring different elements. So Neil Stanworth, welcome, first of all. He will be sharing with us some key findings from an economic analysis study that he's published recently. We then have my lovely former colleague, Tanya Hamid, who's now moved to social finance, and she's joined by her colleague, Liam. Welcome to both of you. And then we've got 3 lovely representatives from various partnerships in Norfolk. So here with me, I have Bethany. Welcome, Bethany. Sarah, I believe you're online. Welcome. Oh, there you are. And Vicky's also joining us online. Warm welcome to you all. So Neil, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you. I did work on quite a few Life Chances Fund projects, but mainly in the design phase and doing the sort of cost-benefit analysis I want to talk about. I want to talk very briefly about some work we were commissioned to do by Big Society Capital around the beginning of this year, the end of last year, when they asked us to estimate the total value created by all social outcomes contracts to date. So I did a big gulp and said, okay, I'll give it a go. So I want to talk very briefly about the methodology we adopted for that, which is something we've done many times before, and then what we found out. So in terms of the methodology, we started by trying to work out just how many projects there were. And Elle's already mentioned the Indigo database. And I do want to give a big shout out to GoLab and the Indigo database, because without the Indigo database, I'm not sure I'd have been able to do this at all. Not only because I was able to identify what the projects were, but also work out which one's which is very hard to do. Several projects have at least 3 names, depending on what they were called when they started, what they're called now, and those sorts of things. So we started with that. We identified 90 projects, and of those, we included 76 in our analysis. I haven't got time to explain all the ones we excluded, but in terms of the Life Chances Fund, specifically, we included 25 Life Chances Fund projects and excluded 4. And the reason in all 4 of those cases was because they're too early stage. And it's an important point about this analysis. This was not an ex-ante analysis trying to anticipate what outcomes would be achieved by projects. It's based entirely on the outcomes they've already booked, they've already done. So, for example, West London Zone has a West London Zone 2 with under the Life Chances Fund, and I can see Joe in the room from West London Zone. West London Zone 1 is included in our analysis. That's actually a CBO project, Commissioning Better Outcomes Fund project. West London Zone 2 is not in our analysis because it's too early stage. But you know, we can talk about that in a bit because it's important to what we find out. We then did some reasonably detailed modelling on all those projects to try and work out the value they've added. I'm not going to go into that in detail. I think a lot of the people in this room will know the sort of analysis we're talking about. Every session I've been at this conference and every predecessor conference has talked about how you calculate the savings and value created by a project. We've got our way of doing it, but please read the report. I should have probably included a link to it in my slides, but maybe we can put it up later. It's available from the Big Society Capital website and downloadable. It's also the only report I've ever written that was mentioned at Prime Minister's questions. But that's, we also, the way we reported our results was in three categories. Again, there's been a lot of talk at this conference about definitions. I'm happy to go into them if people are interested, but a lot will be familiar with these broad categories. Direct fiscal value. Ooh, go back, the one that was like, can we go back previous slide, please? Thank you. So direct fiscal value created, wider social value to society, and economic value, the direct benefit to the individual, for example, being in employment. And we also did gross value, net present value, net of costs, and we did something which is technically called the benefit cost ratio. In other words, the amount you get back for what you put in as a ratio. Now you can go to the next slide. So this is what we found out, essentially, that the total value created by those 76 contracts to date is £1.42 billion. Net of outcome payments, which were 139 million, you get 1.28 billion. And that gives you a benefit cost ratio very neatly of almost exactly 10. So £10 back for every pound created. We also did some confidence ratings. And the main thing that drives the high confidence rating is that the saving is created, or the value is created directly by the outcome. So for example, if a child avoids care, the number of weeks of care avoided have a value, and you can calculate that. Other potential value is longer term and much more difficult to predict, so we have lower value attached to it. The figure that's had the most attention, apart from that total figure, is the direct fiscal value. So the public service commissioners who effectively did these contracts had benefits totaling 406 million. And as you can see at the bottom, we divided our analysis into sectors, again, into the indigo sectors, which are useful and very helpful. So child and family welfare, education, employment and training, health and homelessness. As you can see, they have very different outcomes. And it's important to stress, as we did in our report, that that does not mean that one sector is better than another or more amenable to a social impact bond, social outcomes approach. It's because of a wide range of factors that affect those projects, including scale. And it's just too complicated to explain why they're different, but they are very different for very good reasons. In terms of this session, I think it's important to say three things very quickly. The first is that, as I say, there are 25 projects that were Life Chances Fund, so almost exactly a third of the total. But on a quick and rough calculation, because I can't work it out exactly, they only contribute about 200 million of the total value. And that's because, as I say, the Life Chances Fund is still going through. It's still relatively early stage. So there's quite a lot more value likely to come from those Life Chances Fund projects in due course. The second thing to say is this session is a lot about the additional value, I think, created by ICOM's contracts. We didn't calculate that, and we don't have the tools to do that yet. I think Elle's doing some incredibly important research to try and work it out, because we've been trying to do it through the CBO evaluation for many years. How much more value do we get from an outcomes contract than we get from a conventional contract? What I would say in this context is I don't think I could have done this analysis for conventional contracts, because the people who supplied the data, some of whom are in the room, people like Mila, and I'm very grateful for their help in supplying it to me, were able to give me validated data on how many outcomes have been achieved by these contracts. And for many conventional contracts, that data, I don't believe, would be able to be available, and certainly not in the timescale I had to do this analysis. And the third point is about sustainment, not sustainment in terms of success of projects, but in terms of the sustainment of outcome, because I think this is the area where it is most difficult to do this type of analysis. We took a very, very conservative view and said simply, if someone got employment for 6 months as a result of one of these projects, and we heard about some of the ones earlier that create employment, we will count the value of 6 months employment. We did not assume that they had 1 day's employment beyond that point, which is clearly a very pessimistic assumption. But what we really need to do, I think one of the things that would be great to get better research on is just how long do those outcomes sustain, which requires some very difficult long-term tracking of outcomes. Okay. That's all. Thank you.
Gosh, thanks, Neil. That's fascinating. We would probably fill a whole session just discussing the report, and hopefully we will later this autumn. I will move on now to hearing from Tanya and Liam, who have both been working, and Tanya has also been researching the mental health and employment partnership. So over to you.
Perfect. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Just before I reflect on the prompt that was given, give a quick introduction to the Mental Health and Employment Partnership. So what is MHEP, as we call it? Well, it was a company set up by jointly by Big Issue Invest and Social Finance in 2015, expressly with the purpose of investing into individual placement and support and similar supported employment services. In terms of why it was set up, at the time there was some research done which identified that a strong majority of persons living with severe mental illness wanted to work, yet rates of employment were below 10% for that cohort. And it was the idea was for MHEP to seek to address that inequity through investing in programs which help those persons achieve paid employment. A little bit on what IPS is. It is just a model of supported employment which integrates and values employment as a part of the treatment of severe mental illness rather than as a bolt-on or an add-on to be thought of afterwards. It involves intensive individual support, rapid job search, and then time unlimited individual and employer support once a service user has found work. In terms of who MHEP works with, we partner with local commissioners, national funders, and providers to deliver IPS or IPS adjacent services to persons with severe mental illness, and then more recently to those with addictions and or learning disabilities. You can flip to the next slide, please. So just reflecting on the proposition, or what are the value adds of this form of working, there were three in particular that I think came to mind. The first being that social outcomes contracts, in the sense that they de-risk commissioners, really create the conditions favorable for social innovation and for trying out new services in new contexts or for new service user cohorts. So in the particular context of MHEP, as previously mentioned, this meant expanding the IPS style of intervention into new cohorts like those with addictions and those with learning disabilities. Secondarily, I think one of the benefits or value adds of this form of working is the flexibility that it affords to adapt service design and learn from what we have done in the first part of the rollout of a particular project and inform how perhaps we could achieve better outcomes for individuals moving forward. This can either be in response to the particular needs of a user cohort, or it could be in response to a changing environment. So a good example in the MHEP context for us would be the rapid renegotiation of tariff structures at the start of the pandemic in order to secure funding to enable service delivery to continue as per usual, or as usual as it could be under the guidance out there, despite the economic and social uncertainty that the pandemic created. And then finally, it's perhaps self-evident or a bit tautologous to say, but social outcomes contracts engender clearly a focus on outcomes and equally a whole attendant set of data processes and a data-driven kind of mindset to service delivery. Yeah, I'll pass over to Simon.
Great. Thanks so much, Liam. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be back here today. So I just wanted to build on what Liam just shared and share some insights from research that we did as part of the GoLab last year. I was still part of the team, but we were looking at the 5 impact bonds that are part of the MHEP as part of the Life Chances Fund. And the question for us was really to try and tease out that added value that impact bonds or the social outcomes contract approach brings, especially when it's applied to an intervention that already has a lot of evidence around it, so something like the IPS. And so through our work, we identified 3 main areas where we feel like the value added is strongest. So you see those in that slide here. So the first one is analytical support, then there's operational support, and then finally convening and advocacy support. So I'll just quickly talk through all 3 of these one by one. So starting with analytical support, Service providers in particular felt that they really benefited from the very strong performance monitoring, performance management, and analytical expertise that was part of the impact bond model and brought by the MHEP team. So this meant that they had more than usual access to very detailed reports, detailed data dashboards, and that they were able to use this to gain very granular information on their projects and how those were performing. So this meant that, for instance, they could identify problems much more quickly, much more precisely, and then could come up with more concrete solutions working with the MHEP team. It also meant that they could benchmark more easily. So they could identify some comparable services, compare to those, and really understand what best practice looks like, what good looks like. And then finally, while they had been working on similar outcomes previously, they felt that the performance management function drove even stronger focus on achieving those outcomes as part of the impact bond model. Moving on to operational support, there was very strong collaboration and partnership working. So this meant that there's been a continuous conversation on things such as local resourcing, the co-location of employment specialists, and also when it came to performance challenges, such as sometimes underperformance or low referrals. And so here, the problem-solving element was quite strong, especially given the advice from the IPS specialist employed by the MHEP team. And then finally, in terms of convening and advocacy, commissioners and local authorities in particular felt that the MHEP team and the impact bond model could really help them with applying for the Life Chances Fund funding. So the MHEP team very much took the lead on applying for and unlocking additional financial resources for these projects. And as we've just spoken through, as we know, this is a multi-stage and often a multi-year application process, but the projects were very much protected from the administrative burden of that by the MHEP team. In addition to that, there's been constant sort of signposting to relevant opportunities, market intelligence, and connections to other stakeholders. So just to bring all of that together, we feel that there's been added value in terms of collaboration, flexibility, innovation, and that's been underpinned by analytical support, operational support, and convening support. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liam, and thank you, Tanya. And it's my great pleasure to now turn to our last project for this part of the discussion, and delighted to be welcoming two commissioners. So Bethany, welcome, and Sarah, welcome. And obviously we have Vicky with us as well from the Bridges Outcomes Partnership. So they will be talking about the multiple partnerships in the area. Who wants to take it away first? Sarah, over to you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I am a commissioner in Children's Services in Norfolk, and the project that we've got is called Stronger Families, and it's an educare project. So basically, we found in Norfolk at the time that we were having real concerns with family conflict and children, especially between the ages of 8 to 15, ending up in care. So the project was around to try and reduce that. And we use a functional family therapy approach to work with those families to prevent the children going into care. The aim was to work with around 400 children, and to date we've worked with 296, and that has equated to 86,915 days out of care, with a cost avoidance around 4.8 million. So I think the main thing to talk about around this is the first time for Norfolk to have a kind of outcome-based contract. And I think it's gone very well if you go by those figures. But it's very similar to what other people were saying, like Robbie and Sarah were saying. It's around that governance that we have with the monthly board. It's the up-to-date live data that we get, and having proper adult conversations around any concerns and any changes we need to make. And so there's been that flexibility. And some examples of that, we've tweaked the age range. So we've now gone down to 6-year-olds and up to kind of 16, 17, and additional therapists have been employed, and we've also decided to kind of go for that projection of educare, so that trajectory, so we can get in earlier, and by getting in earlier, obviously that also reduces that kind of cost throughout social care. So I'll say that and leave it there, because I know I've got literally like a minute and a half.
Thanks, Sarah. Sorry if we've been so mean with the time. So over to you, Bethany, staying on the commissioner side. Yeah.
I'm Bethany Small, so I'm a commissioner from Adult Services in Norfolk County Council. So we commission a social impact bond for carers, which is delivering information, advice, assessment and support for carers in Norfolk, and that's adult carers caring for adults. And the benefits we've seen from the social impact bond is really that it encourages, as others have said, like collaborative approach between commissioner and provider. So in our case, Carers Matter Norfolk. What it allows you to do is have a spec that focuses on outcomes rather than on you will do X amount of things each week. You will do it in this way. You will do it. You will publish this. You will do that in quite precise detail. And what that means is that the provider is able to be much more innovative and flexible in their approach, which means that they can better meet the needs of the carers that they come across. It also means that when they come across, so when our provider finds other bits of innovation or through the work that they're doing, find better ways of doing things, they can just start doing that. Without us having to do lengthy contract variations and conversations and all of those sorts of things, they can just get on with doing what they think the right thing is. What that's supported by the fact is that actually in our social impact bond we have a dedicated data officer, and so what we often have is very real-time data, whereas traditionally you would get data quarterly in arrears for lots of contracts, and that means that when problems occur we're aware of them much quicker. We're able to pinpoint the cause of the issues and then work together to come up with solutions. So, for example, in our contract, we noted in 1 month, we'd received an excess amount of referrals beyond what we had in the previous months and beyond what we were expecting for that month based on previous years. Actually, what we could do very quickly was pinpoint down not just the organisations that were over-referring, but the individual teams in those organisations. And therefore, we could link it to where the council's operational business lead for carers had been going out to our operational teams to talk about carers. Those teams had then become very enthusiastic and started referring lots and lots of carers on their caseloads over. And that had caused a peak in referrals. So it's that kind of collaborative thinking, but also the level of data we're able to achieve that we found as a real added value to the contract.
Wonderful, thank you. Vicky, should we come to you next?
Hi there. I'm very lucky to have Bethany as my commissioner on the carers programme in Norfolk. And I think this is the first of its kind a programme for carers. And it's been a really exciting journey. And I think for me, it's this relationship-based model over the traditional transactional model that really, really works, as Bethany and Sarah both alluded to. We have adult conversations. Sometimes when things are difficult in a traditional fee-for-service contract, that can at times lead to providers hiding difficult situations for fear of losing funding. Whereas I'm sure Bethany will confirm that I'm quite often harassing Bethany because we've identified something that may come up in the future or an issue, and we're really, really transparent. So within our particular programme, we're achieving all our outcomes, but that doesn't stop us either. We are continuing to strive for the optimum service delivery model. And because of the flexibility that we can bring to this programme, it really does allow us to explore different avenues that perhaps we wouldn't normally be able to. I think another thing for me where it really does add value, and please, my lovely commissioners, correct me if I'm wrong, it's those shared learnings that we have across the programme. The ever-changing pressures within social care, particularly around unpaid carers at the moment, means the pressures are changing not only within our own service, but the context in which we work in, shortage of carers, COVID, etc. And what it does allow us to do is really flex and respond in a way that the other formats we perhaps wouldn't be able to do. But we also have those conversations where we share those learning and we mutually influence. So we can go to our commissioners and say, this particular referral pathway isn't working for us. And it's impacting our programme negatively and vice versa. And then we work together. And again, I know this is a theme that comes up, but that collaboration really does make a difference to the working practices of the authority, our working practices, but most of all, it really, really impacts the outcomes for our beneficiaries, for our carers, for the people that we're working with.
Thanks for that. So I guess clearly flexibility, agility in adapting to what the data says, just having more data and more performance data, all coming up really strongly from the examples we've heard from. We're doing okay for time. Again, thank you so much, speakers, for being so good with time. So I'll just pause for a question or two. And I noticed a question in the chat earlier from Ian Ma, who was asking about the wider systemic impact of some of these projects. And thank you for those who responded to him directly. I just want to quickly pause to pick up on this question, because I know it's something that's coming up in a lot of conversations. And indeed, later today, we've got a panel discussion from 4 p.m. So Ian, tune in for that. But we've got two commissioners with us. So I'm just curious, without wanting to put you on the spot too much, and I know it's a tricky question, Sarah and Bethany, I'm very curious from a council's perspective, how are you thinking about embedding some of the good practice within the wider system?
Do you want me to go first, Bethany? I mean, that's a great question, isn't it? I think for me, we are learning so much from this project. It is a very different way of doing something. And you know, the conversations I have with my strategic commissioner, my manager, and you know, we're really keen for this to keep going. And I think, you know, we're already having discussions about extending, you know, what happens when the LCF goes. Is there something else that's going to come in? But but it's also learning the fact that actually this outcome focused kind of way of working is, and having the live data is something that is a better way of working. And I think it makes it more tangible. You're seeing the result, and you can actually report on it. And I think what Bethany alluded to, that, you know, it can be quite frustrating when you're trying to talk about or make changes when you've got figures from the last quarter and you're in this quarter, and it's not necessarily the same, is it? So yeah, I think the two main things for me to take from it is one about the outcome side of it, and the other is about the live data. I think they're the two big things as a commissioner you want to know.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. Bethany, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, again, I absolutely agree with what Sarah said. I think if we stick with the donut metaphor, we're very much interested in both the jam and the donut of the model. So what can of course, it's important to us, what is the jam doing in this contract, but also what is the donut providing us that we might want to look at in our other contracts. And we are only 2 years into our carers contract, so we've got another 3 years of that to test that model.
Okay, wonderful. Well, many thanks to all the wonderful speakers on this segment. So we're now going to move on into the final part of our discussion, and really time's just flown by. My colleagues have put up a slide here. You might have noticed at the GoLab, we love a Slido survey. It's because we want to hear, you know, not just from our lovely panelists, but also for those of you in the audience. So obviously, this question of sustainability is a really important one. Esther, Mila, you've both mentioned it. You're already thinking about these questions, and so with our next 3 speakers, we're going to get to the heart of some really complex questions. And, you know, I'm not sure if they've got all the answers, maybe they do, but really what we want to do is start a conversation and see what people are thinking about. So because we'd love to know what sustainability means for all of you, especially if you're working on projects. I'd just like to invite you to either scan this QR code or go to slido.com, put in the hashtag, and then just make sure you select the correct session. So in case you're not sure, when in the Life Chances Fund Evidence and Insight session. So you should see 2 questions once you're in the Slido survey. We'll keep this slide on for a minute or 2 just to make sure you can all access it, and then we'll see what your responses are. We'll see the questions on the screen in a moment. I think the first question asks what sustainability means to different stakeholders when it comes to impact bonds. And the second question is around some of the key considerations that we should start thinking about. Juliana and Ellie, my lovely assistants, are we getting any responses through yet? Okay, wonderful. Shall we have a look? We can't actually see it on the screens here, Juliana. Okay, well, we'll keep everyone wondering, everyone who's not in front of a screen, what the answers are. We'll come back to those in a minute, but why don't we? Oh, there they are. Thank you. Okay, so let's see some of the answers to the first question. When it comes to social outcome contracts or social impact bonds, what does sustainability mean to you? Long-term impact and system change. No surprises there. Oh, lots of answers coming to two things: financial sustainability and also sustainable outcomes. Continue to improve quality of support for vulnerable people, more resilient commissioning environment. I think that's a great one. And I feel like depending on your perspective and whether you're a commissioner, provider, organization, or indeed other type of stakeholder, that question might look quite differently, which is why I'm delighted to be bringing in for the next part of our discussion, three very different, all hugely experienced practitioners, but I'll hand over to Elle to introduce them.
Thank you. Thank you so much for participating in that survey. There are some common themes there in terms of what sustainability might mean, but what I think is interesting is that despite having 10 years of outcomes contracting and impact bond experience in the UK, there's no clear picture on what comes next. And I think because each project is really working in a very particular way, it's not just that we're thinking about the specific outcomes for people, but they sit within their own systems and might be affecting systemic change in different ways. And so we're still learning really what might come next after an outcomes contract or after an impact bond. Should we do another? Should we embed the learning in different ways within our commissioning system? Might it be something else altogether? And so we've brought together three great speakers to speak to some of these issues. Emma Hanley, Strategic Commissioner from Kirklees Council. I know that you've already begun thinking about what comes next following the LCF. So I wondered if you could give us a flavour of your thinking on this sustainability and legacy issue.
Everybody, I'm Emma Hanley from Kirklees Council. I'm the Commissioner responsible for the housing related support services within Kirklees, but also the wider quality and contract monitoring unit for all services contracted out within adult social care. We're already embedding some of the lessons learned and the practice that we've developed through knowledge we've developed through KBOP in our wider adult social care contracts. Some of which I didn't know had names like relational contracting till yesterday. But yeah, so I think we are embedding some of the learning into other contract management and procurement exercises, particularly around the relational elements of contract management, which I believe is particularly important when we're talking about services for people and solving complex social problems. Having good relationships with providers of services improves the quality of those services and enables open, honest, transparent discussions to really truly enable problem solving and taking joint responsibility for the outcomes of some of the most vulnerable people. We're trying to embed much more of a true focus on co-production, enabling people to determine what they want to achieve and how they want to achieve it, instead of social workers determining what they think people want to achieve, and genuinely listening and co-designing services with providers to help to achieve those outcomes for people. So I'll give you some examples. So we've put much more of a focus on outcomes, for example, embedding the learning in domiciliary care, which is very, very traditionally time and task. We're negotiating the care home contract and co-designing that and the specification with care home providers. We've recently supported setting up a care association to give care providers a voice and a way of working and inputting into services where they might not want to come to speak to us individually. They can kind of come to speak to us as a collective. The performance management and accountability for outcomes is also well embedded. So that's the kind of good bits. I'll go on to some of the challenges we've got now. So we're in quite a unique position in that we previously had services and contracts delivering these services previously. And therefore, at the end of the programme, we will still need to commission those kinds of services. And the value added of the infrastructure around this way of working does have a significant cost, which at the moment is being picked up through the Life Chances Fund. It does appear to drive performance and improve outcomes and add value. But how do we then kind of embed that and fund that when we've got constrained budgets? Because politically, it wouldn't be very palatable to take funding away from frontline services. When we set up the programme, we did think we had an exit strategy, maybe naively. We thought that if we evidence savings from other commissioners, they would potentially come on board. However, the majority of the savings is the wider public purse, and therefore we're not particularly able to extract them locally. For example, getting people into work saves the Department of Work and Pensions money. Supporting criminal justice impacts on probation budget, police and the courts, and supporting health initiatives saves the NHS. All of these are subject to national, regional, sub-regional budgets, priorities and procurements rather than local initiatives such as KBOP. So it's often talked about that there's a complex ecosystem around individual beneficiaries with a myriad of issues, but I think there's just as many complex and financial political ecosystems with public finances and that are equally complex, and are particularly around how cashable some of those savings are. So how do we fund the infrastructure if savings and benefits achieved are not cashable, such as through costs avoided, or when the savings are not to the outcome payer? And how do we continue to innovate for better outcomes and improve the life chances of the people of Kirklees? Answers on a postcard, please.
Thank you, Emma. That's such a critical question, and one that I think we hope to dig into in the rest of our conversation, and indeed in the conversation that will take place after this session. We hope that this is the start of a conversation between projects and partners around how to address some of these challenges. Please do keep the questions coming in through the Zoom chat. Sangeeta Patel, I'd like to come to you next. Sangeeta, I understand Sangeeta works with the Chances Project with an organisation called Substance, and I understand that you've had a few conversations with partners recently about legacy and what this partnership arrangement means. So Sangeeta, could you introduce us to your project and talk about what sustainability might mean for you here?
Sure, thanks, Eleanor. Nice to be here. Really great to be amongst all the kind of lots of the LCF projects. We're quite new to this, we feel. With 16 providers involved in Chances and 23 local authorities, summarising how we approach things and how we do things at Chances is pretty challenging, but I'm going to give it a try. I heard someone earlier on say that time was, sort of we were in a good place with time, but we might not be after I've gone through our sort of thoughts and considerations on it. Before I address the question of how we're thinking about sustainability beyond Chances, I think it's probably worth setting a bit of context as to how Substance, and we're predominantly a research data management technology company, how we came to managing what's essentially the first social impact bond that uses sport and physical activity to deliver positive social outcomes for young people. So I think that will help provide the context for the rest of what I wanted to say. Substance, we've been involved in kind of research evaluation, also delivering and commissioning sport and physical activity interventions for over 25 years now. And I think we've got a good sense of what works in these interventions. You probably didn't realise that your jam and donut analogy was going to get used so much, but I think we've got a good sense of the kind of the jam in the donut. Although we're obviously continually kind of interested in innovation and innovative solutions, but we are really concerned with how the sector, and it's been come to known in the last 25 years as the sort of sports development sector, how the sector continued to grow and build and sustain itself. Back in 2017, Sport England, their then national strategy, made mention of social impact bonds as a form of a kind of much needed alternative investment into sport. So sport isn't a statutory responsibility. Budgets kind of centrally and locally got cut, about 30 years or so ago. And so all the agencies involved in sport have had to think in that time really creatively about where investment can come from. And so at Substance, we saw this as an opportunity to think about social impact bonds, and we set about developing a business case. I suppose fast forward 5 years and, we're talking here with you guys about sustaining and potentially replicating and scaling the Chances SIB. So for us, again, going back to the kind of jam and donut, for us, the objective isn't necessarily to test what works in practice, but of course we're interested to understand about innovation, particularly bespoke, person-centered solutions. But our primary goals in running the SIB are probably threefold. The first is to test whether social impact bonds can be effective as a means to financing sport for development. Can we be successful in returning the investment back to the investor? Have there been sufficient payments to providers for the cost of delivering the intervention? Secondly, to test whether through the use of social outcomes contracting and payment by results methods, they're both forms of contracting that are still kind of quite narrowly used in sport for development, but through these forms of contracting, whether sport for development providers can be more effective in delivering positive social outcomes for young people. And thirdly, in doing so, can we then prove through the means of more rigorous data collection and evidencing that sport and physical activity can make a difference to young people's lives? So they're really our kind of goals. And so now we kind of have a dilemma, and I feel like this is now a shared dilemma because I've shared it with you, with everyone in the room, but we won't really know whether we've been successful in our goals until we get to the end. And I think, like someone said earlier, we're just under halfway within the kind of lifespan of our 4-year contract. So we're 22 months in. So what do we do? I think what we've got to do is assume that we will be successful in those objectives. I think we have the responsibility to all of our stakeholders to lead that kind of sustainability process. So we're in the game. And as you mentioned, Elle, we've already had some stakeholders come to us and ask us kind of, what are we doing about it? So we feel like we've got to lead this process, and we want to. So we're thinking about the main challenges that face us. These are our considerations, but it's important for us to understand the kind of assets and strengths that we've got going into the kind of next stage of this. So I think we've probably got 4 or 5 key challenges. I just want to quickly talk you through them. Our first challenge and our main challenge is about the scale that we're already operating at. So we have 16 providers delivering across 21 local authority areas. We didn't design the SIB to be that big. We did design it for 16 co-commissioners. We didn't anticipate ending up with 22. And then we've obviously got LCF and Sport England as our co-commissioners at a national level. So there are a lot of people that we need to kind of take with us on this journey. And what we've absolutely heard over the last day and a half is around co-commissioning, co-design, co-creation. And so that needs to be, didn't necessarily feature so heavily when we started, when we set up the SIB in the first place, but we'll need to feature pretty heavily as we go forward. We designed the finance model to include 16 local commissioners. And in a way we did that, it was a bit cute, we did that to try and to sort of override complex procurement processes within local government. Some of that might have kind of backfired on us, because then what we ended up with was lots of local authorities who wanted kind of smaller slices of the pie and to jointly fund kind of projects. So the scale of that stakeholder engagement is quite vast. It's a big task. And although all of our commissioners, they work to a central specification, a central outcomes framework, a central rate card, they have 21 different ways of interpreting that. So quite rightly, we have 21 individual conversations with our commissioners as to how this relates to their local priorities. So that takes time, it takes capacity, it takes tenacity, but it's really important. It's heavy lifting that we know we've got to do. We've got to take that into consideration as we go forward, particularly as we're still managing the operation of the SIB. And then obviously there's the inevitable commissioner churn. So we've had to build 21 local relationships with commissioners, and that's probably increased to about 25 now. And I suspect it'll probably go up a little bit more as we get towards the end. And we have the whole spectrum. We don't necessarily, they're not all the kind of Bethanies. We have the commissioner from the kind of bring it on commissioner to the we're taking a punt commissioner to this is the hot potato of projects commissioner. So going forward, we want to work with more of the kind of bring it on commissioners. I suppose because we haven't necessarily got the time or the capacity to waste time and to, for this to kind of be a black hole, we've identified the stakeholder engagement is a big piece. One of our other challenges is around the finance and the cash flow model. The SIB, Chance's SIB is kind of heavily led by our finance model. And because we commenced the contract during COVID, we had additional pressure, sort of financial pressures. We didn't quite get the timeframes right. We didn't quite get we didn't match up the timeframes around delivering interventions. Some were school-based with the time, understanding when outcomes would realistically land and how that would impact upon our cash flow model. So I think we've still got some challenge around getting that right and refining the model as we go forward. We've also got another challenge that's really become apparent since we started the SIB, which is really Chance's. The Chance's cash flow is made up of 16 individual cash flows. How do we kind of converge those into one central model? Moving on, our rate card for Chance's is perhaps a little bit too wide. And so we're always looking to kind of review and maybe refine the outcome measures and the rate card. The wide rate card has helped us. The wide rate card has helped us when we've gone to local authorities to kind of get the buy-in. They can see how improved health or reducing offending, improving education, improving or reducing educational absence or EAT outcomes can be beneficial to their disadvantaged young people. But it's
Sangeeta, sorry to interrupt you. Thank you so much for sharing such a clear set of questions and challenges with us. I just want to invite a couple of other reflections from other panelists, but thank you so much. We've actually had a question come in from one of our online participants, Deborah, who asks, what has typically happened to date when a SIB has ended? Did it just end or did it get funded in another way through another form of contracting? Richard, I want to come to you in a minute for some reflections on that and your broader experience. But I'm also particularly keen to pivot back to the MHEP team because you have had several impact bonds, and I was just wondering whether you wanted to offer some reflections on this sustainability issue.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to report in the context of MHEP, the majority of our projects that have finished or our contracts that have finished have been picked up by the local commissioners moving forward under the more standard fee-for-service style of contracting. I think in MHEP's particular situation, oftentimes we're trying to be at the forefront of new interventions or again expanding an intervention into a new context. And in that sense, what we're really trying to do through the SIB often is to make the economic and social case for why this should be commissioned in the longer term by whatever commissioning model somebody wants to pursue or is most comfortable for the local commissioner. Yeah.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you. Now, Richard, you've got a lot of experience both from chairing impact bonds and outcomes contracts in the UK, but also internationally. We were hoping that you might offer a few reflections on succession planning.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm currently chair of 6 of the 30 Life Chances Fund SIBs, all of which Bridges happened to be the investor in. Looking internationally, I thought I'd offer you some observations or lessons perhaps from a couple of years I recently spent with the Global Fund. So I was a senior advisor at the Global Fund. They're a Geneva-based organization. They spend billions of dollars every year, giving it to countries to tackle TB, HIV, and malaria. They're a grant-making organization, and they have some countries which they classify as transition countries. So these countries have received the funds for these 3 diseases, and they're transitioning out of the Global Fund, and in theory, will have to pick up the delivery of these services or the provision of these drugs or whatever it is through their national budgets. And they drew me into a number of these conversations. I was there trying to talk to them about how they could use contracting, performance-based contracting ideally, to increase the impact on those 3 diseases. And they had a particular issue in these transition countries with HIV services for what they call the key populations. So sex workers and men who have sex with men. And they just couldn't see how these services that they'd been paying for were going to transition out and continue. Now, the first thing I thought that they were missing here was that they just failed completely to understand that really what they were asking was, who is going to pay for these services when they're not paying for them? They just never talked about the money. They never recognized this was actually about paying someone to deliver that service. They're a grant funding organization, so they don't connect their spend with their delivery, and they don't demonstrate how they connect their spend with their delivery. They have no business model within their services. There's no business model to show what resources are deployed where, at what cost to deliver what service. There's no shared definition of success between them, the service provider, and the government. No one says, what does performance look like? What are we looking to achieve here? What are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve? There's no transparency over what is being delivered. There's no data capture. You've heard a lot about data here this morning. There's no data capture there whatsoever. So there's very poor accountability. And whilst they have monitoring and evaluation, it's post hoc monitoring and evaluation. There's nothing happening to live data and live tracking of performance. So they've got nothing to share with the potential future commissioner in terms of information about what this actually costs and what you can deliver for that cost. There's no business case for the commissioner. And they're very often working with low capacity community-based organizations. Basically, the decision makers who will decide what to pay for next have no idea what's going on and no buy-in into what's going on. So if I then quickly reflect on 2 SIBs that I'm chairing right now, which are coming to an end in that a year or 2 down the line, the current contracts will end. One of them I think will continue, one of them almost certainly won't. And what's the difference between these 2? I think in the one that will continue, there is clearly senior buy-in. The commissioner is senior in the hierarchy within the local authority, and in turn has a strong relationship with the directors and the executive within that authority. In the one that's going to end, that's not the case. The commissioner doesn't really buy it, isn't really interested in it, and there has been no strategic engagement at that executive level to demonstrate to them actually what is happening within that SIB. In the one that will continue, the information sharing has been excellent. It carries on a monthly basis, and in fact, in that case, I'm stepping back from being the chair, and the commissioner is going to become the chair of the board going forward, demonstrating the level of collaboration, knowledge sharing, and general ownership. In the other, that's simply not the case. It's also the case that in the one that will continue, it's an existing service. So it's very unusual in SIBs in that it was an existing service that was moved out to an outcomes contract and that will continue beyond this contract because the service will continue. In the other, it's one of these SIBs which is a sort of drop in the pond. Here's an innovation, here's a new pilot program, let's run it. It's new money. Where's the money now going to come from when it ends? Emma's posed these questions very clearly, these challenges. I wish it were as simple as demonstrating, as Neil does so powerfully, the economic argument, the return on this investment, because the return is huge. These outcomes are big outcomes for people at a high level of need, socially excluded individuals who cost a lot of money and cost a lot of money pan-sector. And as soon as we revert to a non-outcomes contract, we fall back into those silos. But that argument doesn't seem to be enough. So all I can advise, and I'm building some outcomes funds right now, we will try from the outset to engage at an executive level and then to ensure that there is this information sharing on a monthly basis of what's being delivered, at what cost, to whom, and in that process, try and take them along with us.
Thank you so much for sharing those illustrations with us, Richard. I would love to open it up to the audience now. So please do feel able to use the raise hand function if you're in the Zoom room, or equally wave at me if you are in the room. Do we have a question? Ah, yes, Chi Hung.
First, congratulations to everyone involved in the Life Chances Fund. I mean, the amazing work you do is incredible. So 2 quick observations and a question. The first actually builds on Richard's point and Neil's point, which is that for lots of existing granting and contracting, we just do not even know how do we look at cost and benefits. And so when we revert that to look at impact bonds and outcomes contracts and the often used challenge about these being so expensive, we need to see that as actually backfilling a system deficit. The system is incapable of really doing and sustaining outcomes in any intelligent manner, and that cost is never made visible to the system. So that's the first observation. The second is about this issue of ROIs and costs. I think one of the presentations, I think it was Robbie, you mentioned about actually part of what you do is to link people up to services that they previously were not using, but actually they should be using. And so actually just a fiscal argument can be really disingenuous because sometimes the costs actually go up in the short term before coming down again. And the question that builds on both of that is, all of you talk about outcomes, all of you talk about person-centeredness. How many projects actually measure outcomes beyond the payment outcomes, the wider outcomes? Because if we are going to mobilize other people to come into the picture and get them to see that an issue relates to them as well, and not just an employment or education matter, then I think these wider outcomes matter, because the saying goes, things that get measured gets taken seriously. And if we're not measuring these, we're not really valuing them.
Thank you so much for that question, Chi Hung. Sarah, you've been phenomenal at responding to people's questions in the chat, but I also wondered whether I could bring you in response to some of the questions that Chi Hung poses there, particularly thinking about broader system deficit, but also the potential to bring in other commissioners.
Yeah, no problem. It's a really great point, and it's something that we really strive to capture. We do try and capture that within KBOP. We record everything that somebody achieves, irrespective of whether it's on the rate card or not, or has already been submitted as an outcome or not, because we want to capture somebody's journeys and somebody's achievements. So wherever possible, we record that on the system, we record that as part of their outcome star, and we record that for them as part of their knowledge of what they have achieved as an individual, irrespective of whatever our contract mechanism is in the background. I think it'd be really important to try and record the wider impact systemically, particularly around those other services like Emma mentioned, DWP, justice, housing. What is our impact on those different services? And then, you know, as stated, we can evidence that and we can take that forward. It is something that we've been trying to capture, working with Neil and the team at ATQ, but it's quite challenging, if I'm honest, because often we know everything that we've done, we know the impact of it, we know the value of it for the individual, but how do we quantify that against other commissioning streams or against other services?
Strict time masters. Exactly as Sarah said, and I guess just the way, so very shortly, exactly, but not enough. Exactly what we should do, but not enough. And I think the way we're thinking about it, and Sarah's work in children's services demonstrates that quite a lot. It's at two levels really. So that more holistic view for the individual and what are all of the aspects of that really make a difference in the children and family work and the work that Sarah is commissioning. There is an incredible amount of insights at that parental level, at the child level, in thinking about how some of the learnings from that practice can be embedded in other projects is certainly what we're doing. But then also at the second level, that's overall place-based impact. And what does that mean for the organizations? What does it mean for partners? What does it mean for the other commissioners? So yes, it feels critical to us, but it does feel like there is a lot more that we can do, and we're really keen to do that.
Thank you, Mila, and apologies. I feel like I've instilled fear in our speakers. We're doing okay for time. We have 6 minutes left, so lots of times. If you do have more questions, put your hand up. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Joe from West London Zone. So I've got a back problem. I don't know why I sat at the front, so I had to quickly move to the back. Just on the point, actually, about the wider outcomes, I think hopefully we're going to find that the rich kind of data that we've been collecting on programme participants is going to allow for that more sort of, I suppose, longitudinal measurement, really. There's a couple of the local authorities we work with that we're just starting to think about, right, beyond the programme end, to what extent can they then measure the extent to which those programme participants have been involved or not in higher tier escalations later. We measure whether they've gone on to achieve GCSEs and things like that after the programme. But that longitudinal thing that we require our sort of commissioners to do, we can't do that, I suppose, So, relationships are important. People made the point earlier about commissioner churn and things, but we hope to find some real insights from that. And I think that's really important for us as well. Final point, we're quite early intervention, working with early years primary kids. And so demonstrating and proving that we've caused, savings later gets a bit intangible, really. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing, the outcomes of that.
Thank you.
Can I just offer a word of warning in relation to this? So a number of the development impact bonds are attempting to attach payment to longer term impact. And I worry about that, because actually the strength for me of an outcomes-based contract is that it's a performance-driving contract. And the payment that you attach, the outcome that you attach the payment to is the behavior driver within that service delivery. I'm not saying we shouldn't measure beyond that, but don't lose the strength of the outcomes contract in terms of the proximity of the payment actually to the inputs as well. Push them too far away and they don't drive the behavior.
Yeah, Caroline, so your hand up.
And actually for Neil, because when you showed your slide, I liked how you broke down the returns by the wider outcomes, the economic value, and then the other one. I'm trying to remember exactly. Yes, but you also looked by sector, and those returns were different. Like employment was higher. Did you also break down within sector whether, for example, the wider returns were bigger for employment and that's what drove the higher rate of overall returns, or were you able to look at that?
Yes, we did break it down.
I'd be curious to know what you learned.
If you've got time to read the 60-page report, it's all there. It's not, we were very keen, and for various reasons, you can't identify specific contracts, but you can identify groups of contracts and types of contracts, which is the way we modelled them together. And a lot of the variation is due to things like what Joe's just been talking about. So it's very much harder to attribute long-term outcomes in education, but they're there, which is why I fully take Rich's point. I wouldn't want them necessarily tied to outcome payment, but in terms of trying to provide a convincing case for some of the people who need to back these contracts, you need to know that. You get very big numbers in employment because there is some pretty good research on the lifetime economic value to an individual of levels of qualification, and also of avoiding being long-term need, which was talked about in the chances project. So if you then get some quite big numbers, but those, picking up Emma's point, which I fully sympathise with, if you're a commissioner saying how much of this is tangible to me, tomorrow in terms of I can spend it when budgets are very tight. It isn't. And I think it's, frankly, it has to be central government that picks up that wider benefit, as it has in the past, to be fair, with some of the projects like the DWP Innovation Fund. But so it's tricky. I don't doubt it's tricky. And there was a lot of debate about the extent to which we should push on to cashable savings, for instance. I'm very reluctant to do that because cashability is an extremely difficult thing. And one person's view that that is cashable is another person's view that it isn't. And I'm very skeptical when people say it's cashable, particularly when they say it's cashable at scale. Well, if people are going to start closing down prison wings just because they get to scale, it's just not going to happen. In my view. So.
It's tricky. That's a great line to wrap up the session on, Neil. Thank you. We're now 1 minute away from the end of this session. Evelyn, we've seen your question in the chat around evaluations. There's lots of resources that we've gathered. So not only evaluations conducted by the GoLab, but indeed other organizations in the field, which we host on the GoLab Knowledge Hub. I'm sure one of my colleagues will drop the link to that in a second. So before we say goodbye, any final thoughts from any of our panelists? No? It's tricky. Well, in that case, all that's left for me to do is just to say a huge thank you to all of our speakers, both online and at home. Those of you working on the ground, delivering these projects, we know it's incredibly hard. We know you're incredibly busy, and we couldn't be more grateful for being so generous with your time, with your insights. And we're just very keen to continue these conversations, continue to gather your learning, try to synthesize it and open it up. Sorry, Mila, was there something you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to say, not to finish on it's tricky, but to finish on exactly what you said, the learning. I think there is such a richness of learning across all of these projects, not just within the Life Chances Fund, but not just within Life Chances Fund. A lot of it is featured on the various fantastic resources that GoLab has. But I think there is so much learning and so many relevant insights for the types of issues that we're all working on, that it would be great to that feels like the most kind of useful offer, hopefully, that we can all give to everybody, because we're all working on similar things, and it would be great to make more of that.
Thank you, Mila. Let's continue the learning. That's a way better message to end this on. Thank you, everyone who joined us, and I'll see you all who are here after the break. Thank you, everyone. Bye.